Loch Ness, one of the most haunting and mysterious regions in the Highlands of Scotland. Every year, around 1 million people are drawn to the loch to experience its unique atmosphere, to gaze upon its somber and majestic scenery, and perhaps catch a glimpse of the creature that dwells in its depths. But few of them know that on the southern shores of the loch, there lies a house that has witnessed events that are even more strange and even more bizarre. A house in which the notorious Aleister Crowley invoked demonic forces over a century ago. A house in which those forces still remain to this very day.
Crowley was a rich kid. His father owned Crowley's Ales in Leamington Spa. But unfortunately, he was a member of a family of Plymouth Brethren in the 19th century. He was born in 1875. And the result was that he came to absolutely hate anything that looked like religious authority. Raise eyebrows because most people don't believe that magic works. But in fact, what Crowley realized was that magic does work. And he devoted his life to it, I suppose.
As a young man, Crowley became a member of the Order of the Golden Dawn, a ritual magic society that included men such as MacGregor Mathers, the supernatural writer Arthur Machen, and the poet W.B. Yeats. Crowley's concept of magic, spelt with a K, had little in common with black magic or Satanism. Crowley saw it as a doctrine or technique for making contact with spiritual entities for the purpose of expanding human consciousness onto a cosmic plane. In 1899, Crowley arrived at Loch Ness. He was immediately drawn to Boleskine House as the ideal location he required to perform a complex and demanding magical rite. This was
He took Boleskine because he wanted some quiet place where he could practice the magic of a magician called Abraham Allin the Mage. And it's a fairly long ritual and would usually take about 6 months or even longer.
Now, Abramelin magic was something that had come into the Western literature in the 15th century. It was transmitted by Abram the Jew to his son Lamech to invoke the good forces, the angelic forces, in order to overcome the dark forces.
He had to have an isolated house that was indicated. And it had to have a terrace, kind of a flat area outside, and it had to be without nosy neighbors. I don't know how he heard about Boleskine, but he must have been attracted to the name because it's actually derived from Baal, the bloody god of the Babylonians.
He spent almost a year looking for this type of house. It had to be a house which opened onto the north, doors opening onto the north, with a terrace which he could cover with fine river sand, and with a part of the house where the spirits, which he called that, would congregate.
The reason for this fine sand is that just so that for your own affirmation that this process is not just pure imagination, as it were, fantasy, that you can see the feet marks of the beings you're invoking. So afterwards.
I mean, he really did know a lot about magic. He was willing to go through an enormous amount of difficulty and pain, so to speak, to perform rituals properly.
Crowley began work on the Abramelin ritual with great enthusiasm and high ideals. In his diary, he describes his promise: not to use this sacred science to offend the great God, nor to work ill unto my neighbor.
The ultimate purpose of that particular operation is to achieve knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel, which some people would describe as the higher self, the inner genius. The Holy Guardian Angel is one of the great aids on the way to this enlightenment, I suppose, would be as good a word as any other.
A guardian angel is a name of convenience for this guide, who will see you through, and who's on your side. It's your own personal guide. And theoretically, every human being has one.
According to its practitioners, part of the process of summoning the Holy Guardian Angel is that the initiate should develop the ability to invoke the Lords of Darkness and compel them to serve the light. Crowley described the kind of results that began to appear. While I was preparing the talismans, a task which I undertook in the sunniest room in the house, I had to use artificial light, even on the brightest days. It was a darkness which might almost be felt. The lodge and terrace, moreover, soon became peopled with shadowy shapes, sufficiently substantial, as a rule, to be almost opaque. In dealing with these dark forces, the Holy Guardian Angel becomes the magician's source of power.
You have to command those four lords to gather their minions and make them serve the Lord, the true Lord of light, the true Lord of creation.
Crowley was making steady progress with the Abramelin ritual, but despite his best intentions, he interrupted his work when MacGregor Mathers, head of the Golden Dawn, summoned him to Paris.
His master at the time in the Golden Dawn was in hot water over something and pleaded with Crowley to come and help bail him out. So Crowley dropped the ceremony, which was, you're not supposed to do this. I mean, once you begin something, you should follow through.
In his diary, Crowley wrote, "As far as I was concerned, Mathers was my only link with the secret chiefs to whom I was pledged. I wrote to him, offering to place myself and my fortune unreservedly at his disposal. If that meant giving up the Abramelin operation for the present, all right."
Interrupting a magic ceremony is a grave thing. I mean, he later realized that he should not have gone to Paris, and he should have let his so-called master, his name is Mathers, fall in his own shit. Because finally he realized that he was a false master. If you invoke the spirits to come and help you out or to teach you or whatever, there's something important that has to be done afterwards. You banish them, you clear the air. He never did that.
After breaking off the ritual, Crowley spent little more time at Boleskine House. But whilst he may have left Boleskine, the forces he had unleashed did not.
Well, I mean, apparently a very, very dark cloud hovered over Boleskine House. It is said that locals from Foyers, instead of taking the bottom road, used to go all the way around the top to avoid it. That actually it had, you know, a sort of an effect that actually frightened them, basically. And that probably added, to some degree, this negative image that about Aleister Crowley.
I think anybody who tries to control the spiritual world is going to make a mess of it, because these spiritual forces and entities don't want to be controlled, and they will come in, pretend to be helpful, and then take over themselves.
Now, when he failed in that Abramelin magic, I think obviously there would be bad effects, and they could have easily used that place now as an intersection point. It may be something that they have got some type of connection to now. In other words, that, like say, in some type of battle where you now seize that area of territory, they might consider that's their territory now.
In the years that followed Crowley, Boleskine House frequently changed hands. Many of its owners suffered either professional or personal misfortune. The British film star George Sanders was one of the investors in a piggery venture at the house. The business collapsed. One of the partners was later jailed, and many of the abandoned animals starved and died. Another owner of Boleskine, a retired army major, actually committed suicide in the bedroom Crowley used.
He supposed to have a room of his own as you come in the front door, and his own room and bathroom there. And I went to look, and there he was in front of this big mirror, and his head off. So I was so scared, I did run back to her bedroom, which was quite a distance, you know. And I said, the Major shot himself, Mrs. Grant. When we came up, and I went in the front door, there was this little bone at the front door, and they had a little doggy. She gave it to him for his birthday. Pickywick was his name. And I says, where did you find that, Pickywick? Because they had a huge fridge. There was nothing in it, and I wondered. And I took the bone and just threw it. My husband used to laugh afterwards at what I did. Anyway, the detectives, I told the detectives this. We knew it was a bone of his skull.
Some kind of magical influence pervades the area.
Colin Wilson suggests that there's more phenomena since Crowley lived beside the loch than before that. Of course, we just don't know really how many people claim to see the monster in the olden days, and it was never recorded. But if it is a spiritual phenomenon, then it's possible that Crowley created more sightings of the thing, that he got these memories out of the box almost and got them floating around, yeah.
Crowley's ambitious attempt to summon demons and turn them towards good was always liable to be misunderstood.
People who looked for, you know, as it were, the negative, would have assumed that in some degree that he was doing something, you know, that was actually bad, whereas in fact what he was trying to do was something extremely good, and he doesn't succeed.
Dennis Wheatley used to say at the beginning of his books on witchcraft and magic that he really strongly advised people not to try this, and I used to think, ha ha, what a joke, how silly. But in point of fact, Wheatley's perfectly right. If you mess around with this kind of thing, you get tainted by it, and unpleasant things tend to happen. And I think that this is, in fact, what happened to Crowley. And many people think that it's the fact that he left the ritual unfinished that led to the misfortunes of his later life. I wouldn't be in the least bit surprised.
Crowley's subsequent career was indeed dogged by scandal and controversy, and a rather unsavory reputation grew up around him in the popular press. He is said to have finally completed the Abramelin ritual and to have contacted his holy guardian angel several years later, whilst traveling in Egypt.
Crowley did find his guardian angel, and he named him, the name that came to him, he didn't, his intellect didn't name it, the name came, like you have something that appears in a vision or a dream. And it was I was. The technical name for I was is Lucifer, and what does Lucifer has nothing to do with the devil. Lucifer means, in Gnostic terms, before Christianity, Lucis Fero. It means, I bring the light. It's the spirit that brings the light into the world.
For the remainder of his life, Crowley continued his own attempts to spread the light through his magical work. Under dictation from Aiwas, or Lucifer, Crowley completed the Book of the Law, his Bible for a new religion for the post-Christian age. It would be called Thelema, or sometimes Crowleyanity. He even devised a new religious ceremony, a Gnostic Mass.
Thou that art one, our Lord in the universe, the Son, our Lord in ourselves, whose name is mystery of mystery.
But does Crowleyanity have any valuable insight to offer?
Enlightening the world is also the...
Crowley understood quite early in his life that religions have a shelf life. They have a life expectancy, and what is appropriate in one aeon is inappropriate in another. We started off with the tablets of the law, which were broken. In their place was put the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, the harsh commandments, thou shalt not, suitable for children. Don't stick your fingers in the electric sockets, don't play with the fire. They're children's rules. We've now moved beyond that. The Book of the Law is a charter of universal freedom. It gives every individual, every man and every woman on this planet rights. And we're now grown up enough, I believe, to actually exercise those rights and to take responsibility for our own actions.
O lion and O serpent that destroy the destroyer, be mighty among us. Do what thou wilt, shall be the whole of the law.
Love is the law, love under will.
Its main precept, do what thou wilt, shall be the whole of the law, was frequently misunderstood as a justification for selfish and immoral behavior. This was not Crowley's intention, although many people believed that his own personal morality did little to further his cause.
I mean, people said, oh, that it's just an excuse for sex and everything, but I mean, his creed, do what thou wilt, shall be the whole of the law, doesn't just mean go and do anything you like or go and kill people. Or it means find what your true will in this world is and fulfill it, which is, I guess, what most sane people would want to do. And the response to do what thou wilt is love is the law, love under will. So one would say if you fulfilled that, you're not likely to do anyone any harm except maybe yourself.
During his lifetime, Crowley remained largely misunderstood. He died in 1947 at the age of 72. His body was cremated and his ashes were scattered and lost. But the spirit of Aleister Crowley was set to rise again. In the 1950s, American filmmaker Kenneth Anger began a series of films directly inspired by Crowley's work. Crowley's rebirth as a cultural icon for a restless and rebellious generation was underway. The counterculture of the 60s, Crowley's work seemed to embody the desire for free expression and for a break with the past. Crowley seemed to have a special appeal for musicians, who saw themselves as the social rebels of rock. He was included amongst the celebrities on the cover of the Beatles' hugely successful Sgt. Pepper album.
20 years ago today, Sgt. Pepper taught the band to play. Lead guitar, Jimmy Page.
Led Zeppelin's Jimmy Page took a more serious interest than most. He studied Crowley closely. He collected Crowley's paintings and books. And in 1971, Jimmy Page bought Boleskine House.
Jimmy Page was deeply involved in the occult, or deeply interested perhaps, and he had the money and the time to buy into it, and he apparently had a fantastic, maybe still has, fantastic collection of Crowley memorabilia. But he didn't spend much time at all. And I mean, you spend all this time and money and you buy the place, and then he didn't bother about it.
Page retained ownership of Boleskine until 1991, but the house was actually lived in and looked after by an old school friend called Malcolm Dent. But surely the effects of the young Crowley's magical work would have cleared Boleskine by now.
I had no idea why he'd bought Boleskine House, the estate. I hadn't ever heard of Aleister Crowley. So arriving at Boleskine and discovering, one, that it has a history and a past, and a pretty weird past at that. Two, that there are certain things still going on there. Three, there are people who will visit the place to experience this and even practice it. And four, that one of my oldest friends seemed to be actively involved one way or another in this. There was a lot of things to sort of take in.
Photographer Doogie Correns was a personal friend of Malcolm Dent. He often stayed at Boleskine House and also took many photographs there.
Having spent quite a few nights there, I felt very uncomfortable when I went to bed. The lights were out. I would go off to sleep. I always go off to sleep immediately. But I always woke up at 2, 3 in the morning with feeling very uncomfortable. There was a definite feeling of a presence, a very strong presence that was trying to maybe get into you.
Probably one of the first episode that made the biggest impression on me was sitting in bed or half lying in bed, and something outside the door of my bedroom was snuffling under the door, which it started off as if it was a dog and then became very much more powerful as a sound and as a noise and as an impression, to the extent that I snapped on a light beside the bed and was, well, I have to confess, very, very frightened, because it became extremely noisy and as if the door was going to come through. But I had a feeling as to what the creature was, and it was huge and very, very evil. And I was very, very frightened. Crowley, when he was raising the various demons and spirits at Boleskine, failed to banish all of them back from whence they came, and that one or two residues had been left behind, and he actually mentions that he had left this one bricked up, in, as he put it, in the centre of Boleskine House. The room I was in that night was the centre of Boleskine House. Why didn't we go mad? Why didn't we run out screaming our heads off? We wouldn't allow that to dominate our existence or our lives. Boleskine House was essentially a family house where a family was living, having as good a time as it could as a family, and attempting to blossom as a family. You had to acknowledge that somebody would come in from outside and have some incredible freaky time while you were there, and you saw it and witnessed it, and they were responsible for it because of their heads. House was good at that. House responded to, the Boleskine House responds to people.
Boleskine House did acquire new owners, but they have so far refused to be interviewed by television or the press.
They bought the house because they liked the house and it's their home, and if they spoke out about what may or may not have happened, they would be perpetuating the Page Crowley days and getting all the nutcases in the world wanting to come inside and have a look. So by keeping quiet and not saying anything, perhaps they hope that these strange people will go away.
But can the lingering effects of the past ever be erased from Boleskine House?
I think it ought to be blessed. And if I had any friends who'd bought it, I would say, have the building blessed and exorcised, and have a celebration of communion in the house, and dedicate it to God, and let the peace of God come into the house and bring goodness and peace into it. Bring it back to its natural state.
The world in blood, though death devour, though time decay, let but our hearts hold brotherhood, and this they shall not take away. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, so let it be. In God we trust.